left the story off of Grayson's JIA journey, we had finished up January 3rd of 2019 when he got his original diagnosis of Oligoarticular JIA. And this was at Children's Hospital up near Wauwatosa, Wisconsin. All of the measurements, all of the metrics, all of the symptoms pointed to oligoarticular JIA. Thankfully, we were given a diagnosis right away, it's a common enough disorder that there is a fairly standard treatment protocol that is followed. As I have said, all of his symptoms agreed with his diagnosis, other than the fact that he was 6.5 years old, which is a little bit old to be diagnosed for the first time, which I have talked about in previous videos. I do continue to bring it up for a particular reason, which I will get into in another video down the line. The first treatment that we were given was naproxen, a high dose of naproxen, which is an NSAID, a non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drug. It worked right away. In the weeks leading up to this January 3rd visit, checking my notes as I say this, there were many mornings when Grayson would wake up in terrible pain, unable to walk. There were some mornings when he was simply limping and it wasn't so bad. But it was a pretty constant drumbeat of every single morning a very similar story. The day after we were given naproxen, he started taking it that evening after this doctor's visit. The very next morning, January 4th, 2019, he woke up with almost no limp at all. And the month of January continued that way. It was amazing to me. So he was just being given naproxen. They were pills. We would crush them up and put them in yogurt. I believe it was twice a day, this high dose of naproxen, this NSAID. There was the occasional morning limp, but really nothing, no issues at all, as far as I could tell. We did have a visit, we did have a follow-up visit January 31st. And this is the visit when I found out that mitigating inflammation is not enough. What you have to do with at least this particular autoimmune disorders, but I'm assuming with all autoimmune disorders, what you're aiming for is a complete ablation, like a complete obliteration. What's the word for it? Like no symptoms at all. What you're looking for is no markers of inflammation at all. I don't know if it's the right way to say it, but it seems as though inflammation begets inflammation. And so any kind of inflammation at all is always a danger. You never know when that's going to continue to get worse or better. You never know when you're going to have an episode. So if you can actually have zero markers, that is best. So in the January 31st visit, I kind of showed up and I said, hey, everything's better. And the specialist looked at the knees and they said, it is better, but it's not at zero. They had, they tested the mobility of his knees. They had him walk up and down the hall and they found out that in fact, he still had plenty of fluid in there. So we had to schedule a procedure for 9 days after that, February 8th of 2019. We scheduled a procedure where they were going to do two things. One procedure that he'd actually had before, which was aspirating the fluid out of his knees, which I talked about this procedure in a previous video. It was a nightmare. It's a simple procedure, but painful, uncomfortable, that is performed on adults all the time, I guess, with these kind of issues, where you simply stick a needle into the knee capsule and pull, just withdraw fluid out. And I was not down for that because the last time that had happened, it was really painful for a 6-year-old to go through and he wasn't prepared. They said, no, that's not how it's going to go. It's going to be a procedure. He's going to be twilight. It turns out they didn't twilight him. They actually put him under general anesthesia, which we didn't realize until we actually got there that day. But it was an outpatient procedure, and they did two things. They aspirated the fluid out of his knees, and they actually injected cortisone steroid in there. I think it was cortisone, some kind of a steroid into his knees at the same time. And it was an outpatient procedure, but it was pretty involved. It was in a surgical unit. It was in an operating room, and it was really professionally done. And since then, there really haven't been any other issues with his knees at all. We actually do continue to go back to the pediatric rheumatologist every 3 months, even though it's an hour drive, because at this point he's on medication for his eyes. The ophthalmologist that we work with, of course, is the person who checks the eyes, but does not prescribe the medicine. It is the pediatric rheumatologist who actually established the medical the medicine and renew the prescriptions. That we also get Grayson's liver enzymes checked at that time to make sure that his body is not reacting against the medications, because they're getting, they've gotten pretty intense as time has gone on. So we actually have to continue to go back to the pediatric rheumatologist on a regular basis. But every time we go back, they check his knees, they check all of his limbs, they really make sure that there's no more inflammation at all. They're extremely thorough about these things. And that's pretty much the story of the knees. That's all there is to say about his knees. The only time we've gotten any kind of a recurrence of pain at all in the legs was when Grayson unfortunately contracted COVID through me. Obviously, we did not want to become infected with the virus. We were particularly worried because my husband has comorbidities, and of course, Grayson is on immune suppressing medication. So we were really worried when this pandemic came around. And I knew that, it's going to be bad news if we contract it. I went to work 1 day a week because I kind of had to, because I teach science classes, and science classes involve labs. And so I would go to school 1 day a week, unfortunately to a campus where there was quite a lot of COVID spread. We took a lot of effort in making sure that we were as safe as possible, and small number of students at a time, and wearing masks. And I offered all my labs online. The lab room itself, it actually has a really good ventilation system because it's anatomy and physiology. I don't know, we did our best, but unfortunately I did get a little bit of a hit of the virus, and there was one student who was infective one day. The student reported it to me the next day, which I'm always grateful to have heard it, that they tested positive the next day. But anyway, so yeah, I brought it home from work, and the whole family got it. We are as certain as anything that we never gave it to anyone else, which there was a comfort there, kind of stopped with us. So that's good. But I definitely carry a lot of guilt that I'm the one who brought it into my home, and what did I do wrong? How could I have been more careful at work? So we got it, And Grayson, his knees were, his legs did ache during that time. He definitely had symptoms that were of greater level than the rest of us. A higher fever. The symptoms were just a little bit harder on him. The only time we ever had ache in his legs was during that time period. It turns out that, as anyone with an autoimmune condition could attest to, there are basically two things that cause a recurrence of symptoms, or they cause an episode, and that would be a viral infection and stress, a stressful situation, or a life that's kind of filled with stress, maybe an episode of stress in life, for example. So yes, in Grayson's case, when he was infected with the virus, unfortunately, he had a recurrence of pain in his legs, and we reported this, and we were constantly calling, the physician group with his symptoms and with all of our concerns, and they were extremely responsive. But that's it. Other than that one time when we unfortunately had COVID, there has been no other issues at all with his knees, for which we are extremely grateful. We are very grateful for this.